I've been re-recording my first 6 albums because there was a thing that happened where I had wanted to own my work of my first 6 albums, and when I changed record labels, my first 6 albums were actually sold away from me, and so I decided to I just figured if I made them the first time, I can make them again.
I love it. I love it.
Taylor Swift is one of the most recognizable artists of our generation. She's won hundreds of awards, including 11 Grammys, the American Music Awards Artist of the Decade Award, and she has recently even received an honorary doctorate from NYU. But what does Taylor Swift have to do with intellectual property? Those who follow Swift's career or just follow popular culture know that she is re-recording her first 6 studio albums recorded while she was under contract with Big Machine Records. This video essay will dive into her reasons for re-recording, the history of intellectual property, master recordings, and re-recording the music industry. And finally, this video essay will discuss why re-recording matters. Chapter 1, Songwriting. Taylor Swift is an incredibly prolific songwriter with 10 studio albums and over 50 songs that she has written completely on her own. Even beyond the 50 songs that she has written alone, she's also credited as a songwriter in every song on her 10 studio albums. Swift has always been honest about how much she values songwriting and how personal the music she creates can be. In the Miss Americana documentary, she goes as far as to call her songs a diary. This comparison alone shows how personal her songs can be. But the use of personal experience in her songwriting leaves her vulnerable to speculation from fans and critics alike. In Keywords and Writing Studies, Lauren Schellenberger explores the keyword body. In her explanation of how writing and the body are connected, she uses the quote, "To write from the body, from lived experience, is a fearsome thing. It is a way of exposing oneself to knives." I feel that this quote encapsulates Swift and her songwriting very well. In letting people into what she herself equates to her diary, she leaves herself vulnerable. But as many fans believe, this is what makes her songwriting so powerful. Being willing to share this much of oneself is something that Anne Herman discusses in You Belong With Me, recording artists fight for the ownership of their masters. She touches on the psychology of creativity, which argues intrinsic motivation is more powerful than extrinsic motivation when it comes to creativity. That being said, current copyright laws focus almost solely on extrinsic motivation. Herman argues that the ownership of their art would be intrinsically motivating for artists, as opposed to the alternative that would have them create work that is intimately linked to their self-concept just for someone else to own that work. Chapter 2, Intellectual Property. In her article titled Intellectual Property in College English and English Studies, Nicole DeVoss pinpointed the first direct instance of intellectual property appearing in 1943 in an article by Harry Hastings. She quotes Hastings' writing, "It is recognized that a man's literary work is property just as his house is." From this first instance, the history of intellectual property becomes long and complicated. That being said, this video essay will only touch on how intellectual property rules have influenced the music industry. To explore this, we first have to look at master recordings and what ownership of the master recordings means. In Exposing the Folklore of Re-Recording Clauses, Taylor's version, Justin Tilghman explains the power that owning master recordings gives record labels. He writes, "Whoever owns the rights to a master recording is free to appropriate and license the recording to third parties for large sums of money and exclude others from using the recording without authorization." He goes on to explain how many artists are not seeing a large sum of the profit from their work despite it being their creation. In Black Artists Struggle to Regain Ownership of Master Recordings, an article from 2002, Gail Mitchell discusses the process of artists claiming ownership of their masters, including success stories that include Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, Curtis Mayfield, and Quincy Jones. Mitchell also goes on to discuss how the door was closed after these artists. Because record labels started to recognize that the value of owning their master recordings of the artists they sign. Interestingly, Mitchell also explains the concept of redoing the masters, which is explained as a way for the artist to own their master recording of their song, even if it's the redone version, which, as Mitchell explains, will not have the same appeal to the fans as the original would. Chapter 3A, Swift leaves record label. On November 3, 2004, Swift signs her first record deal with Big Machine Records under Scott Borchetta. 14 years later, on November 19, 2018, Swift's contract with Big Machine expires and she signs with Republic Records and Universal's Music Group, where she will own the master recordings and anything she produces under them. On June 30th of 2019, Scooter Braun purchases Big Machine, and in doing so, he also purchases Swift masters. It is revealed that Swift did not know that her masters were being sold, and a very, very public dispute began between her and Burchetta about the ownership of her masters and Swift's attempts at regaining them. And finally, on August 22nd, 2019, Swift announces her intention of re-recording her stolen albums.
I think that artists deserve to own their work. I just feel very passionately about that.
Chapter 3B, Intellectual Property, Taylor's version. Swift makes her official announcement on Good Morning America in 2019, just after the release of her first album that she does own, Lover. But even with this announcement, there were still issues preventing Swift from re-recording and claiming her masters. She was not allowed to re-record at all until 2020, and Swift was eagerly awaiting the day she could embark on this project. In an interview with Billboard, she said on the re-recordings, "It's going to be fun because it'll be like regaining a freedom and taking back what's mine." Since her announcement, she has released 3 new studio albums and 2 re-recorded albums, all of which have been majorly successful. And she, of course, is still working on re-recording her 4 other stolen albums so that she can, for the first time, own her entire body of work. What I hope to have expressed adequately thus far in this video is that Swift's intentions for re-recording are not to put more money into her own pockets, and if it has to do with money at all, it's to keep money from getting into the pockets of those who are involved with the selling of her masters. I do think that Swift doing this so publicly and honestly will help us and upcoming artists from getting into the same situation as her, and it honestly seems like it has. For example, Olivia Rodrigo, a newer artist who has been a longtime fan of Swift, cited paying attention to Swift's fight to own her masters as a part of the reason she insists on owning her own, as she signed her first record deal as a young artist. While this is only one example, I do believe that Swift being so vocal about this fight will have influence for years to come when it comes to artists being able to own their own work. I also want to make connections back to Chapter 1, songwriting. I feel that a large part of why it is so important to Swift, or for any artist to own their work, is because of the intensely personal aspects of songwriting. It seems like all of the work that Swift puts out is deeply personal to her, to the point that she refers to her music as her diary. And why should she not have ownership of her own diary? Chapter 4, Why Does It Matter? So when you see an album or song followed by Taylor's version, that means that Swift has completed that re-recording, and that you're not listening to a record owned by Scooter Braun when you do not need to be. When looking at the original reactions to Swift's announcements, you could see some hesitation in her fan base. It is a hesitation that relates to I discussed in Chapter 2, where longtime fans may not want to listen to the re-recordings over the original records. But from what I have seen, and at least from her most avid fans, there's little to no hesitation now that these albums have actually been released. As The Guardian touches on, and I Made My Peace, fans divided over Swift's re-recording project. It was difficult for longtime fans to let go of the nostalgia that came along with the original releases. But as I've said before, this hesitation was short-lived. Avid fans of Swift have latched onto these albums with no question after re-releases.
This album is a re-recorded album, and I cannot tell you how much my re-recorded albums mean to me, but I never expected or assumed that they would mean anything to you. So I can't thank you enough for caring about this album that I'm so proud of.
And if you happen to still be here as a casual listener of Taylor Swift, I hope that you can take what I've discussed in this video essay and think about the connections songwriters have to their works, and I hope that everyone understands why Swift has made the decision to re-record and why you should be listening to the Taylor's version.